been around for 10 of Unizen's 10 and a half years. So I don't know what that gets me, maybe a little lapel pin at something or at some point or something. But if you are unfamiliar with Unizen, we are a member-based consortium. We are all higher ed institutions, all large R1 institutions. We have one small R2 institution, but we all have one thing in common. We have resources available to us to do things with data. So Unizen was created as a way to help institutions wrangle control of their data from third-party vendors, who we more and more are outsourcing our digital classrooms to, which is not a bad thing. But since we're doing that, there's data being generated that could be very useful. There's certainly learning curves, right? We all learned, especially in 2020, there's learning curves to bring people on board to teaching in the digital age. And so Unizen came together, or institutions came together to form Unizen to do a handful of things. So we sit on 4 main pillars. First being student affordability. So we operate an inclusive access program that is utilized by 5 of the 14 institutions. That is mostly publisher content from about 24 publishers, though we do include in there as well some OER, and we'll be expanding upon that in 2025. We started pass-through billing, which is to say the institutions pay Unizen and Unizen then pays the publishers. We started pass-through billing in summer of 2017, and we've saved students an estimated $124 million in that time. Of course, you all know that you can do a lot of things with numbers. We can make estimates look really high, really low. In this case, I can make an argument in both directions. So I think that means it's a pretty good estimate. So we'll go with that, $124 million through the end of 2024 that we've saved students. The second pillar is analytics, right? So I talked about all that data that's being generated on third-party platforms. Unizen has built what we call the UDP, the Unizen Data Platform. And all this is a series of pipelines that pull in data from disparate systems, normalize them, model them, and make them available to institutions so that instead of having a dashboard for every different tool that's used, we can essentially build one dashboard where you can see a student across all of the tools. So we have institutions. Unizen doesn't actually do most of that work, right? We pull in the data and then it's up to the institutions to do fun things with. So we have institutions that have reflective teaching tools and student activity scores and advisor dashboards, all sorts of things we can do once we have that data. Unizen exists to help bring that data together and make it available for the member institutions. Third pillar is managing ed tech costs. So we have relationships with just over a dozen ed tech suppliers. Instructure and D2L are going to be the 2 biggest, with Canvas and Brightspace. We do have others, Top Hat, Packback, Kaltura, different vendors like that. So largely what gets talked about is the savings there. Since we're negotiating on behalf of 14 very large institutions, we get good rates. But beyond that, we are also putting in those contracts requirements for the vendors to return the data back to the institutions. Usually that's through the aforementioned UDP. But yeah, so affordability, supplier cost, and then data through the UDP. And then the fourth, John, if you want to flip to the next slide. And this is what, when we're talking to prospective members, this is what gets talked about last and longest in terms of the benefits and the pillars, and that is the teaching and learning group, which is what we all here are gathered under the umbrella of. And this is all of the practitioners in different ways that touch teaching and learning from a digital aspect at all of our member institutions. This is where we come together, talk about the issues we're facing, talk about both successes and challenges, and we do this in various larger groups and then smaller subgroups as well. So that is a perfect transition, I think, John, to you to talk about this particular subgroup of the teaching and learning group. Thanks everyone for joining.
Awesome, thanks, Brad. So again, everybody, welcome. If you wouldn't mind putting your name and institution and your role in the chat, that would be great as an introduction, so we can see kind of who all's here and what role you particularly play in your institution. So as I mentioned, I'm John Jordy. I'm one of the subcommittee chairs for the Faculty Development Subcommittee, along with my awesome colleague, Christina from Rutgers University. So really, our subcommittee goals for 2025 is about sharing and providing support and feedback for each other. So us in our spaces in faculty development, many of us come from Centers for Teaching and Learning. Many of us come from teaching and technology or different areas like that with instructional design and faculty support. So really our job in this subcommittee is designed to come through and support each other in finding out what are we going through, what are some things our faculty members are struggling with, how do we communicate that information broadly to our faculty, how do we provide workshops, activities, active learning sessions, really to center everything that we do around faculty support. So that's the main design of the subcommittee. I've asked Zandria, who works in Unison, to provide a link to which, if you would like to sign up for any of the subcommittees, there's a number of subcommittees that some of you might be on that Unison offers, and Brad mentioned a few of those, with affordability, with the UDP, with some of the learning analytics. There's all kinds of really awesome subcommittees that you're welcome to participate in. Thank you, Sandra, for putting that link in the chat. So if you would like to hop in and begin to join those subcommittees, you are more than welcome to, and we would love to have you along for those meetings. So today's agenda, we're going to do some welcome and introductions. Then I'm going to talk about the actual principles themselves. Then we're going to have the panel discussion with the questions. Then we're going to have a section at the end for Q&A. Many of you and others have sent in some amazing questions, comments, thoughts regarding this particular principle. So we're excited to chat about that at the end of the discussion. And please feel free throughout the session, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, either put them in the chat. You're welcome to raise your hand. So if you have questions for the panelists here that are going to introduce themselves, or just questions in general for us, please feel free to put those in the chat, or again, raise your hand. This is again, what we consider an active session, and we really want to make sure that we're using our time wisely and that we get your questions answered. So let's get started. As I mentioned, my name is John Jordy. I'm an instructional assessment coordinator at the University of Florida Center for Teaching Excellence, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. And I'm going to turn it over to Adam first to introduce himself, and then on to Stephen, and then Suparna. So Adam?
Hi, morning, everyone. My name is Adam Maxwell. I'm a professor of journalism and media at Indiana University Southeast, one of the regional campuses of IU. And I also have a role with our learning technologies organization across all of our campuses across university-wide as a senior faculty fellow for Gen AI Learning Innovation. So I do a lot of work in faculty development and helping faculty explore the art of the possible, with Gen AI, and also developing other resources for training and education in the space.
Thank you, Adam. Stephen?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephen Cummings. I am a clinical associate professor at the University of Iowa School of Social Work, not specializing in AI per se, but I am the distance education administrator for our Masters of Social Work program, as well as the director of our master's program overall. I have been working with our students, our faculty as collaborators, as well as our adjunct faculty to sort of navigate this new landscape where AI, particularly in fall of 2022, just sort of became a really important thing for us to be aware of as far as our course design, our evaluation, how we assess competencies, all those wonderful things. So thank you for inviting me. I'm learning as much as everybody else is, so I appreciate being a participant today.
Thank you, Stephen. Suparna?
Hi, I'm an instructional designer from Rutgers University. I work in the newly minted University Online Education Services, which is we support faculty across the university in online education, and I've been engaged in a lot of faculty development to help develop in course development and preparing faculty with generative AI and how to use it in classrooms and how it can aid as a teaching tool or not. So we're kind of exploring that landscape right now in a big university at Rutgers, which is not the easiest, but here we are.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, so much for introducing yourself. Again, so please feel free to add, if you have not already, where you're from and your name and your institution in the chat. So today, let's talk a little bit about, again, as I mentioned, for the Faculty Development Subcommittee, we started this process a little over a year ago, where the subcommittee identified some topics that we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, and our institutions and faculty needed additional support in. And as many of us know and have become fully aware, the impact of AI has had in our classrooms is having a deep impact on our faculty and on our students. So we really set about to create a set of guiding principles around the use of generative AI in the classroom. Again, this is focused on the actual use of these tools in the classroom and the impact on teaching and learning. So over the course of the next couple months, we already had panels 1 and 2. We're on 3, and we have those recordings available for those who are interested in looking at 1 and 2. Of course, we will have 4 and 5. 4 will be in February. 5 will be in the March term or March month. So please look forward to those, and you're welcome to attend those upcoming sessions. So we'll be hosting again a panel discussion for those to dive deeper. So as you see here, we have these 5 general principles, and we're adding to that. So our subcommittee has again looked in at principles 6 and 7. We're in the development stage of those principles. And again, if you're interested in joining that subcommittee or interested in helping guide those next 2 principles, feel free to add some of those. And one of the things that we do at the end of the session is, if there's something that you see missing from these principles that you need to see addressed or that your faculty members are particularly struggling in, please again add that in the chat or let us know as part of the Q&A. We'd love to hear again from you to see what you guys are experiencing, what your faculty and your students are experiencing, to make sure that we are working on that. So let's dive a little bit into principle 3. So this is stating that generative AI should be taken into account when developing educational uses, for example, activities, assessments, and assignments. So this is one that we particularly are seeing faculty members struggle with. So one of the things that the group began to develop are, how do we look at alternative assessments, in-class activities? How do we design activities, assignments, projects that aren't necessarily removing the role of AI, right? Because again, AI is able to pretty much develop anything, pass a lot of our exams, generate a lot of text, images, videos. It can do a lot of things. So how do we design these activities, assignments, projects that we're really trying to look at the human element of this? So are we allowing the use of generative AI in the classroom? Are we allowing it but with some caveats? Or are we just saying absolutely not? And your particular institution, as we talked about in the previous panel, is probably already developed some of those guidelines. Your Division of Student Life or your other groups have developed principles, or they develop guidelines or even rules around how students can use that to ensure the academic integrity of the course. So it's really important to look at your institution's resources around that, because that's going to have a determining impact for your particular faculty and how they can begin to work with that in their syllabi. Additionally, one of the things that's really important is the design of rubrics, looking at the feedback and evaluation of that, adapting that feedback and the evaluation methods, and ensuring that these are consistent across all the courses in your department. So this is something that we see in particular that faculty members are struggling with, because there is such a diverse amount of faculty in a lot of your departments or colleges that it's really difficult for them to say, all right, well, I'm allowed to use it in this faculty member's classroom, but in this one over here, I'm not able to use it at all, right? So ensuring some kind of consistency in your department or your college is really important as well. And lastly, we really talk about the direct observation, interactive sessions, and again, how to monitor these things in all these different platforms, really trying to stay abreast of the information, because these models, these tools are coming out at such a rapid pace. I'm sure everybody saw all the news of DeepSeek last week. It became the #1 app on the App Store. There's obviously concerns around data privacy and security. There's all these different things that we're not even experts in this field, right? And how do we really ensure that our faculty members are aware of what's out there to make sure that they are using these tools wisely and in accordance with our institution's data privacy, security, and the guidelines that the institution has? Again, feel free to put your questions or thoughts in the chat, And we'll get started with question one, and I'll get started with Adam. So question one is, beyond simply banning or allowing, how can we design assessments and activities that leverage the potential benefits of generative AI while mitigating the risks of academic integrity? Adam, I'll turn it over to you, then Stephen Suparna.
All right. Thanks, John. Yeah, I think that it's easy to say that we should sort of lean into to AI in our classes, but I think one of the challenges that we have now is the norms around generative AI use are still developing and across disciplines. Across both within the academic space as well as in the professional sort of space across disciplines. So I think part of the opportunity that we have is really to start to have these conversations with students, and thinking about how students want to use it, how students how I think being open to how it's being used in the professional environments. I've heard examples where a student might be working in a business, being told, for this business writing, use generative AI, but also taking a business writing class, being told to not use it. So I think we need to be aware of those changing norms, but also recognize that the norms are changing, and when we can engage in a conversation with students in the sort of creation of figuring out where that middle ground is. So I think sort of being open. The other thing too, I think it's important is when we think about our own use, sharing with students how we're using it as well, because I think that can drive the conversation as well. But I don't think there's any sort of one easy sort of approach, because that spectrum between banning and allowing, there's a lot of nuance, and I think we have to kind of figure out what that nuance is collectively.
Stephen?
Yes, just to build off Adam's comment, particularly for students who are doing practicum work or doing internships, I would agree. I'm hearing the same thing from my students, which is, hey, I was advised to use AI tools to fill in the blank, develop this, write this document, and then I'm being told by various instructors, AI is not a good thing. It promotes dishonesty. And I wouldn't agree with that either. And so I would say the first thing right now is it's an evolving process. There is inconsistencies. And so I look at it from two perspectives. First of all, the students are using the tools. I mean, they're the ones that are looking at how do they alleviate their cognitive load right now. I had a student last semester introduce me to the application in Google that allows her to upload documents that then create a two-person podcast playback, and I'd never heard of it. So, just as FYI, it's really an important thing for us as faculty to be not only aware of what things are being designated as AI, but also the specifics of those tools. And that's also something I can turn back and talk to with my students. I'm doing it this spring for a course on death and dying, for example, where I introduced the idea that, yes, we may actually be using AI tools in this classroom to do different things, and also just understand that it's a feature that touches everything. I'm sorry to be a little over the place, but in the death and dying world, people are looking at see if they can create a visual interpretation of themselves after death as a way for memory. So it isn't just writing. It's touching everything, and students are looking to the faculty to understand that these are things that are out there that are going to impact them in their professional lives. So exactly, we have to. Thank you for sharing that link, by the way, Joyce.
Suparna?
I was going to say that, I think a part of it is, of course, students are using AI, as you said, to, relieve the cognitive load. And you can decide as a policy within the classroom that, okay, you are allowed to use AI as brainstorming, or you can use it to kind of have students engage in figuring out how you can break the assignment to pieces, and you can draft submissions and topics and use AI as different ways to support those goals. But I think it's really important as instructors, faculty, to be aware of what you are comfortable with. where are you in your journey with AI, and how does that lead into your teaching philosophy? By having AI literacy, where are you on the spectrum of, am I comfortable using it? Am I a little bit, or it could be that, I'm completely fine with it. And you kind of have to, I guess, gauge and understand how you can design your experiment, design your assessments to either leverage the AI into meeting those learning goals, or you can say that, you know what, it doesn't apply to me at all. But make that clear and very open to students right up front.
If I can sort of jump in and add one thing, I think one of the opportunities that we have that Gen AI sort of pushes us to address is how can education really focus on process, and how can we evaluate process, right? So often we focus on outcome, and thinking about outcome is important, but we focus on outcome in the way that we're measuring it is through artifact. And then we assume all of these things happen before, we get that artifact that we assess, right? So like, if I'm getting a paper, it's an imperfect signal of all of the things that sort of go in to creating a paper, right? The critical thinking, the research, et cetera, right? And for a long time, right, we've been able to just assume that all of those things are involved in that process, right? And now I think generative AI presents an easier way to sort of create a sort of shortcut, right, through that process and get at the point where we have that artifact without all of those sort of pieces, right? So I think that for what that challenges us to do is think, how can I assess the process, right? So, from an instructional design standpoint, I think that can be things like scaffolding an assignment, right? Somebody, our associate VP for learning technology, she said before, perhaps Gen AI sort of is the Trojan horse that gets really great uh, pedagogy into classes. So a perfect example is how often do we see a term paper, right? Write this term paper, and that's sort of the core assessment. That's really the assignment that the student's engaging in, right? And now we're saying, well, to avoid that shortcut of Gen AI, we're going to scaffold the assignment and have students, submit different parts of it over the course of the semester. Well, it turns out that's actually better composition and writing instruction, and has been for a long time, well before generative AI, right? So, in some ways, I think it pushes us to think, how do we re-engage and re-emphasize the process, which I think is also an opportunity for us to re-emphasize, the importance of process and sort of continuous learning in the value of education. But it does, of course, change, I think, and it is a substantial challenge, because that's not an easy thing. That's not a thing that technology is going to do for us. We're going to have to really confront that discipline by discipline and think, how do we build that?
And I'll piggyback off that for just a second, Adam. I think you're correct in scaffolding. I'll give an example in my dissertation course. One of the things that the faculty member did, I thought very well, was that they scaffolded the entire dissertation. So our first meeting was that we had to come up with an elevator pitch, a 2-minute pitch on our dissertation topic and research questions, right? So it had to be short, to the point. We all had a rubric, and so everybody had to get up and give their elevator pitch for what their dissertation was, and everybody had a rubric, and they had to give feedback and say, well, did you really think about this? What about this pitfall, that pitfall? And then the next class, it was, all right, well, let's tackle the research questions. Here's my 2, 3, or 4 research questions. Everybody did the same thing, could raise their hand, say that research question doesn't make sense. And it just allowed us to, again, produce the material, produce that information, as opposed to just doing it at the end of the course. So I agree. It's actually allowing us to, include that pedagogy, that really good pedagogy of scaffolding in our courses.
And I think I was just going to add to that I think the scaffolding also kind of ensures student engagement, because if you kind of break down to smaller steps, students are more active, they're more alert, and to make sure that they are present in that moment and not like having to wait for one big assignment 3 times in the semester. It's more difficult.
I just want to throw in that connect to that as well, because what I found with the AI assignments that I have started using, which are alternative assignments with some scaffolding, is that if you engage the student by letting them know the use of these products are okay. I think that's one of the first things I'm encountering with students coming in. We have a long history of students in my classroom, at least, who are very nervous that they're not writing APA style correctly, and they're going to get dinged for that because they need to format something correctly. And there's a lot of anxiety around that. Whereas if I talk about let's use AI to, for example, analyze an existing document. In the case of some professions, a lot of professions have codes of ethics. So let's take that code and apply it to AI and see if we can get some feedback on this, and then use our use of self to then analyze what AI is telling us. I've done that, and just to connect what you were just talking about, Superna, that engages the students. Get excited about that. Like they see this as something that they can then learn from in this space that we're in.
Awesome. So thank you, everybody. And so as a reminder, principle 2 is actually just that, right? Is that we have to be principle 2 talks really about we have to be transparent. Faculty members have to be transparent about their acceptance of the use of generative AI. Again, those kind of, I think of it as the stoplights, the red, not using it, yellow, using it, but with caveats, and green, we're okay, as Stephen mentioned, with the use of it. So if you want to, there's a great discussion on that with panel 2. So question 2, and again, I'll start with Suparna this time. How can departments and units maintain consistent approaches to generative AI across the courses as a result with the rapid evolution that we're seeing with AI that's coming out with new models, new apps every single day?
I think first of all, the size of a school matters a lot. Like in a school as big as like Rutgers, it's very challenging because you have so many stakeholders, and by the time you're able to collectively put together policies, either area or the technologies advance so much that those policies become redundant. So I think it's you kind of have to have a consistent approach to how generative AI is able to be followed in the most basic way. Like, let's say you're going to do standardized syllabi, but have a protocol, have like a rubric that all departments across the schools are going to have in terms of how you're going to have language that which supports AI usage. That is, whether it's permitted, under what tasks, under what conditions. At least those are the bare minimums that you can always maintain, because that is dependent upon the faculty, dependent upon the university, dependent upon the school. And you can provide examples of, what are the appropriate and the inappropriate uses of, let's say, in different kind of assignments. The other possible way that you can kind of foster that development of policies could be if it's possible, have interdisciplinary kind of committees where you have faculty from different schools trying to work together, where they kind of share what the challenges that they've had and how you can kind of overcome them, and have regular faculty training, like make that as a part of your professional development every semester, that, this is where we were last sem, and here is where the technology is at this point of time. Here's how you're going to be prepared for the next semester. So don't think of like one is like a content knowledge you have as a faculty, and the other is like a pedagogical content knowledge. So you need to kind of keep revising that as technology goes on.
Stephen, thank you, Suparna.
Yeah, I think the size of the school really does matter. University of Iowa is fairly large. Rutgers, I know, has a real national reach. So I completely appreciate that. University of Iowa has principles for AI in the classroom as part of a larger resource that is provided through our Office of Teaching and Learning. And the first thing that I've been doing is referring to that for my own self. I can drop the link in the chat just as a way for guidance from just so people can see what our institution has been doing. But it's also important not just for me to read that, but also to share it with my faculty, have these conversations, both informally and formally. We also rely on a number of adjunct and contingent faculty across the state and beyond. And I do know from the fall, last fall, I've had several conversations one-on-one with adjunct faculty who do feel as if the use of AI is an infringement on them. And they do take, I mean, I completely understand this. It's not just exclusive to adjunct faculty, but it can feel like it's an invasion, it's an infringement or an attack on your integrity as an instructor if you discover that or you suspect that a student is using AI. And so I had several conversations about that. I also wanted to emphasize that I've worked with faculty who, without the awareness of some of the risks involved with trying to use things like AI evaluators, which, for the record, the University of Iowa does not endorse. I haven't spoken to any large institution or any higher education institution where they say that's a good idea to have a paper be run through a so-called reviewer of AI use, because it's highly inaccurate and it makes things more difficult to then do any kind of intervention on. And for the record, if you see that link that I've shared, that's indicated in there as well. So it's just a matter of working with I think that right now, in this space we are right now, both informal and formal, working with faculty and students about what is this concept and what does it mean and how are we using it is really important. I don't know if you can write a hard policy for any of this now or in the foreseeable future because things are moving so quickly. Again, with this new application that just rolled out, the DeepSeek, I haven't had a chance to even play with that yet. So I don't know what that's doing. And I have some concerns about the use of information there, just like anything else. So things are moving quickly.
Thank you, Steve. Adam?
Yeah, so you know, I think that to sort of piggyback on Suparna and Stephen, I I think we might want to move towards sort of consistency, but I think we're not at that point yet. So I think that part of it is empowering one, you know, faculty to wrestle with these questions of appropriateness for their discipline and their courses and give them the tools to do it, right? So often when we're working with faculty, I think that there is this sense that, you know, AI is a thing, right? You know, and it's also a thing that has a capability that's fixed right now. So I think, you know, to some degree, you know, a challenge that we have is, you know, building a for lack of a better term, growth mindset with regard to AI and the capabilities of AI, and recognizing both it is many things, you know, you know, and certainly even if we just focus on generative AI, it is many things, and has many applications, but also its capabilities, you know, are going to continue, right? I mean, I think Ethan Mollick says, you know, assume that the AI you're using today is the worst one you'll ever use, right? And I think that, you know, that's both a interesting and thoughtful thought exercise. It can be scary as well, of course. But I think that's part of it. And so we want to prepare faculty to be able to have those conversations. And at IU, we have a variety of resources. I'm actually putting in the chat here a link to just a short slide deck where we have a lot of links to a variety of resources. Some of those you'll be able to access if you're outside of IU. If you can't, just send me an email and I can find a way to share access. One of the other things that we've been doing, and I think the opportunity here is in the absence of consistency across courses, that can create confusion for students. And I think, John, you had alluded to that. And we have to be aware of that as well. So one of the things we've been doing is in resources that we're providing students, we're sort of being upfront about that. Like, you know, what does our, you know, what does our student code say? And it says something very general. It basically says any external tool, whether it's AI or something else, is presumed to be prohibited for graded work unless it's explicitly allowed, and then for ungraded work, it's presumed to be allowed unless it's explicitly prohibited, right? So we're trying to sort of be, you know, help students be aware of that. Give them the tools to be able to have conversations with their faculty members around it. We actually have a set of student-facing modules, and one of those modules is on ethics. And in that ethics module, we actually have, you know, sample language that you can use to send to an instructor to ask about AI policies in their course if it's confusing or if they don't have, you know, quite if it's confusing or perhaps not even there in the syllabus. So I think part of it is also helping to prepare students with a little bit of that uncertainty of that growth mindset as well. Because ultimately they're also going to go out into to disciplines and fields where that's going to be the same the case as well, right? That some bosses or some companies might have a very sort of fixed view of it, and others might not. And I think students have to be prepared to be able to navigate that uncertainty as well. So we're trying to, I think, help get people to the point where they can, to some degree, embrace that ambiguity and navigate around it.
I was going to say one thing, Adam. There was a faculty I was speaking to, and she sent out an announcement about AI usage, and it came through an email, like it goes to student through an email. So she had a student email back to her. Was it just sent to me? Like, are you just sending that notification just to me or to everybody? And she had to be assured that this is for everyone, not just you specifically.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can I just throw into both those comments that one thing about AI that I think is really interesting is that it seems new and exciting, but it's actually a concept and a thing that's been around, like you said, Adam, for a while. It's not just a thing. And just in full transparency, I'm reading through this book AI Snake, which some of us probably have heard of or have read. And they note in that book that look, there's some kinds of AI that we just take for granted now because it works and it's boring. So for example, spell check, we take it for granted. We have it as it's kind of part, it exists in the places that we use where we do our work and we don't really question it. But one could contextualize that as a form of AI. It's not the scary version of AI that we think of with generative AIs right now. And I think the differentiation the authors make is, well, because it's generally working for us and we don't think of it more than just that it's supplementing our services or our work that we do. So I just wanted to point that out too, because it helps kind of alleviate kind of where we're at. There always is this sense that this is going to upend something and it's going to change. And yet at the same time, it doesn't. It's something that I think we work with, but it's not a new concept.
Awesome, thank you. So question 3, so how can we effectively evaluate student learning when generative AI is used? So what new rubrics or evaluation methods might be necessary? And again, as the panel has kind of already mentioned, and you putting student work in generative AI tools or in some, idea that this is going to be a end all be all to check and verify that this was actually generated by generative AI. We've known that these capabilities don't really exist, right? And then you're talking about student privacy and student data that you're then using and training the model on by putting that information into these models, which you don't want to do. So I'll start with Adam. Can you talk about some new rubrics or evaluation methods that we might need to start looking at to combat this?
Yeah, so I think part of it goes back to the conversation we had earlier about scaffolding, right? Taking a writing assignment and sort of scaffolding. Now, one of the challenges is that that's also can be it's hard to scale. It's hard to scale those kinds of things up, right? One of the reasons it's not that we can't assess process. It's the fact that it is it's challenging to do in our current context, right? Especially if we're teaching, many students, depending on what resources we have. I've talked to faculty about, in some ways we're kind of in a murky middle ground. So, Stephen mentioned a book, and I wish I would have been good enough to find the link to put it in the chat or what I'm about to mention, but hopefully someone will beat me to it. But Sal Khan, who Khan Academy, has written a book called Brave New Words. How AI will transform education and why that's a good thing. And one of the things, it's a wonderful book, highly recommend it. But there's a chapter where he talks about sort of some of these issues around process, and he talks about academic integrity issues, things like that. And he provides a sort of possible future state. And that future state is, imagine there were an AI tool where you don't write your paper in Word or in Google Docs and then send sort of the PDF or Word document to your instructor, right? What you do is you actually write it in that AI tool. And what that AI tool will do is it will submit to the instructor not just the artifact, but also information about the process of creating that. So imagine, I'm in Superna's class, or so is Stephen, and she gets the assignment from Stephen. It says, all right, well, Stephen and I worked on this project for 14 hours. We spent, this much time on this element of it, this much time on this element of it. He really struggled here, did a great job here. The writing itself really matches all the other writing he's done over the course of the semester and even previous semesters, as well as, the stuff maybe he's done in class. I don't think this is an academic dishonesty thing. And, here's sort of the summary of the process along the way. And also here's like the full transcript if you want to dig deep into it, right? Versus, my response is, here's Sabrina, here's Adam's assignment. We worked on it for 5 minutes. This is very suspect. It looks, content's there, but it doesn't really match what he's done, right? Here's the transcript, right? And so using AI both as sort of the co-intelligence for them, but also the co-intelligence for us to be able to sort of dig deeper into that process. Now, we don't have that right now, right? That doesn't exist right now. But when I've talked to faculty about that potential um, uh, future, then we can start to engage in those conversations about how would we even design assignments and how would we design evaluations and rubrics to sort of meet that state, and so we can sort of get into the process. Another example that I'll just share really briefly is that I've had some conversations with some faculty across several of our campuses who really want to engage in developing simulations, right? So I have a faculty member who teaches physical therapy. The whole program has this really amazing set of case studies and scenarios. He wants to start working towards developing those into bots, right? Maybe bots that the students engage with over time, right? Almost as if a patient that a physical therapist would engage in over time, right? And so this high impact practice of sort of applied learning that, again, hard to scale, right? Hard to provide to the students at 3 in the morning when they might want to practice. AI has the ability for us to do that. So I think that's part of the opportunity as well to say, well, what would you love to do? But you can't do now because of these resource constraints. Let's sort of start to move towards that direction and start to have these conversations, recognizing that it's only sort of through those conversations that we can start to see how the technology is not going to just do it. Technology is designed in the way that we want it to be designed, right? So we have to sort of help faculty think about what are those future states so we can start to move in that direction. So no like magic rubric or evaluation method right now, but it's more, something that I think that if we can start to sort of change our mindset to that sort of growth mindset, it can start to sort of, move towards that future state where we can really leverage these in new ways that we can't even do now.
Suparna?
I was going to say that, so when we think about evaluation, I think 3 things are critical as faculty, like, is a student demonstrating original thought, critical analysis, or mastery of the material? So given those 3 bigger, I guess, criteria, we can think of ways that AI might help in helping us look at students' product, let's say, in those terms. And product, when I say it, means it could be like when you are having students submit a part of the assignment, you can say, well, require students to document their steps maybe, or initial ideas, and then see how AI was used in the workflow. So you're kind of seeing their thought process as you're evaluating their outcome that they present to you. Same with that, as I was saying, that you can have AI as a companion, and you can share the report that shows everything that the student did with the AI to produce that particular output. So then, in terms of, let's say, critical thinking, you can have students look at maybe 2 pieces of work, one by the AI, one by what somebody has generated, and kind of do a comparison and provide evidence of showing that, are you able to critique those based on nuances that have been discussed in class? Or you can have maybe students be able to provide, like, even if you define like a rubric, as you're saying, you kind of a perfect rubric, but you can include in your rubric facets like, I'm going to put more emphasis on the process as opposed to your final product? And does your submission that you're putting in have a high criteria in terms of demonstrating the process that you went through instead of just putting a high grade on the product that you came out with? Or it could be that you are demonstrating to me how you are ethically using that tool. So even that can count towards your grade, so as to say, as opposed to just the outcome of that product that you put out there. That's, I think, some of the ways that you can try.
Awesome. We've got some great questions in the chat. Many of these we'll try and get to right after this final question. I'll just park it to Stephen. So Stephen, how do we adapt alternative assessment methods for traditionally written heavy assignment fields? I know this is one of the things that we're dealing with a lot, and then we'll move on to Q&A. Thanks, Stephen.
I'll just quickly note, we've been working with this in my department, which again, for social workers, there's always going to be a component of writing that's required, and we rely on research. And so research right now remains a traditionally heavy writing area. So we have to acknowledge that we're intentional with AI and that we indicate that in our assignments. So for my graduate students, for example, I think it's important that and I'm probably incorporating a bit of question 3 with question 4 here, which is the intentional expectation for how we're using AI, but also what is the intent, what is the purpose of that? How is that rooted in the work that you're doing? Not simply that you're using AI to do something, but how does it link to the practice? So for example, this is not happening in my space right now, but I know that in our field of social work, there's work being done to use AI large language models to create opportunities for students to do virtual clinical interventions with people, with virtual avatars, And while there's a lot to discuss about that, and I'm not the one that's writing that, so I just want to make sure that I kind of premise all this, but that is a version of an alternative assessment method that could be demonstrated in real time. For example, a student I could witness doing that in one of our labs, for example, working with an AI avatar for an intervention, and then assess their ability to use their language and their use of self in that space. That's the thing that comes to mind right now. For me, because it's being developed, I've been at conferences where I've seen this in action. I see this as something that is going to be a reality and a version of an alternative method. So I'll just put that out there as an example of something that we're seeing right now.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. So I just want to, as we tailor down, we have 2 more panels for 4 and 5 that'll be coming out in February, March, so be on the lookout for that. But I really wanted to spend some time for Q&A, so I want to thank the panelists here. And so I'll get started. So Jean has a great question about AI potentially taking notes. I know, Jean, at least for us at the University of Florida, there's actually something in our syllabi about recording faculty in the classroom. So at least on our syllabi, we have a statement that includes the policy or the guidelines around the students recording in the classroom. That doesn't necessarily is not the same thing as the use of generative AI to take notes on those things. But as was pointed out, it's interesting because most of our, whether it's Zoom or Teams, will provide transcripts of what's being said anyway. So I've been really surprised that that's something that they've included. And I'm not sure how they would be able to do that if you're running those applications on your desktop. But let me get to Sharon's question first. How will students respond to knowing the instructor may rely on these AI reports and processes to assess their work? Will they question or devalue the role of the instructor? Adam, do you want to take that one real quick?
Sorry, I didn't see that question. Can you say it?
Sorry, it's Sharon. It's how will students respond to knowing the instructor may rely on these AI reports about process to assess their work? Will they question and devalue the role of the instructor?
I think that's where sort of open, engaging conversations about the role of generative AI as a co-intelligence, as an assistant, both for students and for faculty, takes we have to engage in that conversation. So like if AI is being used as a tool that they're engaging in sort of the writing process, then I think we have to be aware of the role that AI will have for the instructor. So I'll give you this isn't this is a close example, I think, of how I'm actually using the AI in the current space and how I communicate with students. So I teach a class where I basically have told an AI, you're going to act like my grading assistant. You're going to sit right next to me, metaphorically, and I'm going to give you sort of stream of consciousness, observations about an assignment. I teach journalism courses, so like if I'm either maybe I'll talk about, this audio track or that audio track in an audio assignment or something, or some production quality, right? Stream of consciousness, sort of just like notes as I'm observing something. And tell the AI, based upon what I say and all of the context that I'm giving you, the assignment instructions, the rubric, additional information, you're going to put that into like 3 or 4 sentences of a draft feedback that I can provide to the students. And I've been doing that for a couple, for about almost 2 years, about a year and a half now. And in my comments to students, it's still me grading, right? The AI is not grading, it's still me grading. The AI is helping me contextualize the comments and more efficiently grade and get better comments, right? In the past, I would have maybe relied on a comment bank, right? Which I think is less personalized than what I'm able to do with this tool. Now, I've also shared with students that I'm doing that, right? So in my syllabus statement, in addition to saying how students can and cannot use AI, I also say how I'm going to use AI. And I explicitly say this is one of the, communication from me, is going to be drafted sometimes in part through AI. But I make very clear the AI is not grading you, right? I am grading you. The AI will never grade you. But the AI is providing a tool, and I'm still, the one who's evaluating it at the end. So I think part of it is that element of education, right, and norms development, as we have open conversations, but also an element of transparency. And then I think through that, then I think we all sort of recognize that it's not a sort of binary thing, right? It's not a thing where they think, okay, well, AI is grading me, and what's the instructor doing, right? But I really sort of explain, how is the AI helping me, and how is it helping them, and how are we all coming, together to create that? So I don't know if that helps, but I think it's an important conversation to be had too. Is that certainly it can go, very very far, right? I mean, could AI grade something? Yeah. Do we want to do that? Probably not. Do we need to create sort of norms around that? Yeah, probably rules around that, maybe. So I think it's an important conversation for us to make sure that we're engaged in. Yeah, thank you for asking that.
Yeah, thanks.
Well said.
So Suparna, would you
Yeah.
mind hopping for the next question in the chat from Zahir about when utilizing AI, how do we avoid the pitfalls of hallucination?
Oh, so of course, if you're engaging if you're engaging students to use AI in their submissions, or you feel that the students might have used AI, I think having them critique the outputs is a great activity to look at hallucinations. Like, identify if there are some ideas that are not true, or they haven't been cited accurately. So I think, that itself is a very good evaluation strategy when you're using AI.
Awesome. There's one final question that we got previous to this, so I'll just leave it up to any of the panelists before we close today's session, is how do we speak to concerned faculty members about generative AI? So how do we, as leaders, as folks who work in the Center for Teaching Excellence or Center for Teaching and Learning, et cetera, how do we speak to those concerned faculty? So if we could kind of go around, Stephen, would you mind starting first, and then Suparna, and then Adam, and then we'll close.
Well, I think that you have to have the conversation, and you do need to have informal and formal approaches to that. Again, I think, as I noted earlier, I feel very fortunate the institution I work for has some principles laid out that we can start with. The big discussion tends to exist around what is my rights with my academic freedom to allow or disallow or not allow various forms of AI in the classroom. So I'll leave it at that because it's not an easy answer to respond to, but I do want to, my perspective on academic freedom is, regardless of what you think your freedom is, the students are learning and using these tools. They're expecting to do, and it's not just because they're trying to, I mean, there's a perception that they're trying to just shortcut their education somehow. And I don't believe that's the case. Yes, academic dishonesty is a concern, but it has always been a concern. That's probably one of the first things that ever gets written in any university system, is like, how do we deal with academic dishonesty? So take that first. Students are expected to be using these tools in their various areas of practice, whatever that might be. So I always like to focus on, so how do we prepare them for that? How do we prepare them for a world where this world filled with generative and predictive AI resources are just going to be part and parcel in their lives? So the ones getting into taxis where there's nobody driving, right? So they're not going to they're not necessarily going to they're not going to not seek out resources that they can use while they're here. So let's start there.
Thank you. Either Suparna or Adam, do you want to do a final thought before we have to close?
I think frequent conversation with students is very important. Like whatever be your policy, and it's important to be transparent in how you're using it, but don't have it just written in your syllabus and you have in the beginning semester and then forget about it. Have every time you have a major assignment coming up, have the discussion that you remember, and have in fact the students maybe be a co-creator of what are the acceptable AI usage or not in your classroom, and stick to that, just like as a parenting technique, that if you have some rules, make sure that your children are involved in that and try to follow it with them, and practice it and remind them all the time. It's not a one and done kind of deal at all, I think.
Well, thank you, everybody. Adam, do you have a final thought before we?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think, we approach it with care and understanding and meeting people where they are and recognizing that this is sort of not a destination, right? We're not going to figure out AI. This is a transformative general purpose technology that we are going to have to, again, engage in that broader long-term sort of growth mindset, and I think that's, meet people where they are and don't, make them feel like they have to sort of get on the AI bandwagon. It's not a bandwagon. It is a long journey. So I think that's the piece that I would suggest.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining today's panel discussion. We will have, again, panels 4 and 5 coming in February, March. And I really want to thank Stephen, Suparna, and Adam for serving as panelists today. Again, thank you guys so much for your attendance, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.